Today I'm working on a 2007 Ford Focus. I'm going to be repairing the valve cover gasket. Now on the 2007 Ford Focuses, I'm going to show later in the video two very simple steps you must take or your gasket will leak again. It's very important to take notice to those two steps, in which I will show later in this video. Let's say we get started. So you want to start off by removing each of your ignition coil wires. One here, one here, here, and here. Very simple. There's a tab right here. Should push that down and it slides right off. Do that on all four. Next, you're going to remove the 4 bolts holding the 4 ignition coils. Here, there, there, and there. After removing those 4 bolts, take each of the coils and I just place them up here with the 4 bolts sitting right there. I just set them right up there. Another good thing to look for on these ignition coil boots, they will tend to crack. Getting the light here. They will tend to crack right on these rubber bootings. You want to make sure there's no cracks. If you happen to wash your engine bay and you have cracks, this goes down in your spark plug and it can foul your spark plugs. So just make sure there's no cracking. If there is, you can get replacements. I actually had one that had a crack. I just went to a salvage yard and pulled one off, and it works just fine. Was also getting one from the junkyard. You want to make sure that they have no oil down in here. If you have a really bad leak on your valve cover, oil will get down in the spark plugs. It'll get down in these boots and foul your plugs out. So just make sure that if you do grab one of these from a salvage yard, that is nice, it's clean, there's no cracks on the boots, and the inside is clean of oil. If it's good, you can put it back on your car. Now, a good way to tell if you have a valve cover leak is to check down where these spark plugs are. And if there's oil, I know you can't really see very well, but the spark plug is spark plug's down in there. And if there's oil down around the spark plug in there, you have a leak. The thing with my valve cover gasket is that the last time I replaced it, I did a good job. Unfortunately, the 2 important steps that I told you guys to do is over in the timing chain area. There's 2 little divots down in this area, and you need to take some RTV sealant and fill in those divots. The spark plugs is perfectly clean, but because I did not put those 2 divots of RTV sealant in the divot of this block, it leaked. So I have to do it again. So I'm going to show you the next step. The next step you're going to do to removing the valve cover gasket is you have 4 fuel injector wires. You need to remove all of these 4. Very simple, just like the ignition coils. It's just a tab. You push in on the tab, and they slide right off. Do that on all four. The next step is your camshaft position sensor. That's going to be located right here. Same thing, you push down on that tab. Should be a tab. There's a tab in there. There it goes, just slides right off. That's camshaft position sensor. Another good tip, check your vacuum lines. I went out and got new tubing. This line that went from here over into the sensor over here was extremely brittle, and that probably would have kicked on the check engine light for the vacuums. So went out, got a new hose, good as new. The next step after removing the camshaft position sensor is there's going to be another harness right here. I believe you just push this red tab back and this should pop out. Let me get that popped out. Okay, I can't get this popped out, but I will have enough room after pushing this wiring to the side. I can make it work to where I can slide the cover out. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave this. I don't want to break it or anything, but you should just be able to pop this red tab out, and somehow this slides out. I can't get it out, so I'm just going to lock it back in place, and I'm just going to tuck the wires up here and out of the way. Another step is this clip here. You would undo that. I'm not going to do that since I can tuck these wires up, but however, there is a cap down here. You're just going to want to pull that cap up. Okay, there's a harness. You just push in that tab and it should pop out. That will give you some extra room to tuck these wires up out of the way. I forgot one harness after removing these four for the ignition coil. You have your four for the ignition coil, and right next to that is another harness. You're going to want to unclip that one as well. It should just be a tab. And, try to get that off. Alright, there you go, got that off. Now resting over the valve cover is this metal bracket at the back of the engine. You're going to want to bend that up. It will just help you be able to pop this cover. So just kind of bend that back, not really hurting anything. You can, when you're done, you just bend it back. The next step is you're going to want to remove this hose. It goes on this last spark plug. It's going to be right up here. You just lift up this yellow tab. I need two hands. Okay, so I was able to get loose. You just lift up on this yellow tab and that pops off. This line goes up over here. You can remove it from here too if you want, but it's out of the way of the valve cover. So you just loosen it from the valve cover and tuck it out of the way. Alright, so there's a series of 8mm bolts along the valve cover. You want to loosen each and every one of these bolts. Now you'll also notice that these will not pop all the way out, which is fine. But you will notice when they stop loosening. Anyway, you want to just loosen all of these 8mm bolts, and then you will be able to release the cover. So first, let's remove these bolts. Now, a good tip to have a deep 8mm socket really helps. You don't want to have a short 8mm. So you want a deep 8mm. And I got all these loosened. After you get those loosened, you have two more on the inside of the gasket. There's going to be one here and one here. Loosen these two. One there, one here. Now, after you have all of those bolts loosened, carefully remove your cover up and out. And the valve cover is removed. I placed it upside down on the ground here. You don't want to get dirt inside here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a metal pick. You can use whatever you want. I use one of those little Harbor Freight metal picks. And you're just going to pick this out real quick. Just kind of break it loose, and you're going to peel all of this old gasket out. Now, this gasket does look brand new, yes. Because I just recently replaced this gasket. However, the important step that I missed to take, and why it's leaking again, is it's leaking at the timing chain. Now remember those two important steps. I said that there's a little divot or something right along here. You're going to want to take RTV, which last time I did not. I researched on YouTube, and I did not see anybody even mention it. That's why I'm making this video. You're going to want to take some RTV gasket maker sealant and put a glob here and here, along here, along. You can feel it. If you do not do that, it will leak again. Make sure you do that. So first I'm going to pull off the gasket and install the new one. Alright, so I got my Harbor Freight pick, and I'm just going to pick at the gasket and lift it up, and then you just peel it out. Now when you put in your new gasket, you want to see these little grooves on the gasket. These go around the bolts. I'm going to want to make sure that these all match up. And I got my pick, and you just lift that, and you just pull this right out. Alright, before you put your new gasket back on, you want to take some paper towel or something, and you just want to wipe all this oil off the block where the gasket's going to contact. Also, a good tip after you do this is to do a oil change, because if you have any debris from the old gasket or the towel or whatever, when you do oil change, it will flush out. So go ahead and just wipe all the oil. You want to make sure this is clean so the gasket makes a nice contact. Now is the perfect chance to check and see if there's any oil down around the spark plugs. You're going to want to get that oil out. You just take a cloth, suck it out, wipe it up, because that will end up fouling your plugs. My spark plugs again are dry. I did the gasket correct on this part, but the gasket was incorrect with the timing, as I needed RTV on these divots. So the leak was coming from over here, not in the spark plugs on this particular fix. Okay, so I got the engine block cleaned up. I'm going to take that RTV. We're going to put a glob here and a glob here. That was the two main important steps you need to take, or you're going to get a leak and you'll be right back to where, like I am now. So you're going to, this is your kit that you'll get from the auto parts store. That's your gasket. And this is your Permatex Ultra Black gasket maker. Open that up. And just as I explained, you're going to take that RTV and you're just going to put a simple glob there, and you're going to take and put a simple glob right there. Very simple, but very easy to forget. Don't forget those two steps, you will get a leak. Now it's important to take this gasket and make sure that it lines up. It lines up with those notches, but it's not lining up there. So we need to reverse it. You want to make sure that all these notches match up. I flip the gasket over, and now you can see notch goes to notch, and they're all perfectly matching up. Continue on. And the same for here, here, and here. I just take my fingers, run it along the gasket, make sure that it's all firmly pressed in and snug. And now we're going to take the valve cover and place it back on. Okay, got the valve cover back on. One thing with the valve cover, gently, carefully, just slide it underneath the wires, and make sure that the cover stays in there. It doesn't fall out, get moved. You want to make sure that gasket stays nice and snug. It stays lined. Again, if it gets misaligned, you're going to get a leak. So just make sure you're careful. You make sure that the gasket stays in place. After you get your cover back on, you're just going to do everything in reverse. So the next step would be to put these bolts back in. Now, when you put these bolts back in, do what they call a star pattern. This will set this cover equally pressured. Because if you go across, it doesn't set your gasket correctly. It doesn't apply the pressure evenly. Star pattern, you'll go from the top left to the bottom right, top middle, to the bottom middle, top over here, over here. So it's kind of like an X. If you do that, you'll set the gasket correctly. So let's go ahead and set these bolts back in. There is a torque setting on these, which is basically about the same torque as snugging them a little, quite snug by hand. I'm just going to do that. I don't have a torque. I know I'm supposed to torque them. I'm just going to snug them fairly tight by hand, and I'm just going to call that good. I know people might disagree with me on this, but it's my car. That's how I want to do it. After you tighten all the bolts on the outside, remember the two inside. Next, remember those ignition coils that you put up here. You're going to take those and you're just going to put these back in, lining the bolt holes with the bolt holes. So these are just going to go down, sit on the spark plug, and you just line them up right up there, and you'll take your bolts and put those back in. Do those for all four, and just snug down these four bolts here. I've got those four bolts snug down, and pretty much just all the reverse hooking these back up. So you're just going to put all these harnesses back to where they were. That one there, camshaft position sensor, your those electricals here, harnesses going to the spark plugs. Put those all back on. Should just slide right back on here, and you'll hear them click back in there. Remember this one here pops down in there, and you hook up all your fuel injector clips. Hook all those four back up. Now the last time I broke one of these clips, that lock, and so I just went to the salvage yard and cut one, and just soldered the wires back together, put a heat wrap around it, and works just fine. Just be careful with the clips. You don't want to break them. After you get this all hooked up, you should be good to go. And you probably just saved yourself maybe a $300-400 job taking it to the mechanic. Hope this was helpful, and have a good day, and I hope I helped you save some money. Yep, forgot one thing. There was that hose. Make sure you just pop that hose back in and just push it right in. You'll hear it click. One good thing to go over is make sure that you got all the bolts. Make sure they're all snug. You didn't miss any. Nothing's loose. Exactly how you disconnected everything. Everything's connected back up. All the clips are in. All the bolts are tight. That metal bracket that you pushed over to be able to lift this cover up is back. All the wires are and everything is in place. Everything looks good. I hope this was helpful. I hope this saved you money. Um, Please let me know in the comments. And again, I really hope this was helpful, and have a good day.